Good morning. It's April 21st, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. We're getting into the later halves of April, and the weather still sucks. Should be looking better by the weekend. I mean, we're going to start with the small talk about the weather. That's what's important, right? Either way, we'll be getting into a lot of news issues and important things right away here, too. This is the Western Standards live daily show for first-time viewers here. We run every day from 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Monday to Friday, except on holidays. Or if maybe we can coax people to work on holidays and something big breaks, we might do it then too. That's part of the reason why you should subscribe online, because we have regular schedules, but we also pop up with special things all the time. And today I've got a really good show lined up. I'm going to have a media panel. It's going to be Sheila, Gunn, Reid, Andrew, Lawton, and myself. So Sheila's from Rebel News and Andrew's from True North. And we're going to talk about the government attempts to control independent media, and they've been working hard on trying. I think people like Sheila, Andrew, Derek, and all the rest of us are not too inclined to go down easily with that. But it's a great talk we had. And I have to admit, it was recorded. It's hard to get all three of us together at the same time, but we'll run that. And I'll watch the comments and probably we'll chat a bit while it's running as well. And then we have a declared contender for the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race, Elizabeth Claire Lewis. She's another one. We've got a big list growing, and hey, anybody who's running for it, I will give them some time and we will talk to them and see what it's about. So we'll see what Ms. Lewis thinks she can bring to the race. It's a pretty crowded field. So let's get on to what's got me wound up today. So the time is now and the place is Canada. This is the moment. This is the time, guys, when supply management, remember, we don't hear about it often enough in my view. It's supposed to protect us from all these price spikes in food products during extraordinary circumstances. This is when we should be laughing at the world as they deal with hyperinflation within their food markets while we enjoy our coddled and price-protected dairy, egg, and poultry industries. At least that's what proponents of supply management have been telling us for decades, as Canadians have been soaked with some of the highest dairy prices on earth. We were told those high prices were something of an investment. Paying now would save us from paying later when we'd really need it. Supply management would guarantee food security for us all when world supply becomes scarce. Look, supply management's a Soviet-style system that controls all production of dairy, egg, and poultry products. It's literally illegal to produce and sell any of those items if you don't have a quota issued by the state and controlled by a small number of cartels. Some people say it's an exaggeration to call it Soviet-style. Well, when I could be criminally charged for selling milk or owning over 300 chickens, what else could I compare it to? The quotas make a mess of the market, and some producers literally actually dump dairy products into the ditch because if they overproduce and try to sell it, they'll have broken the law. The system really is that ridiculous and rigid. So now that we're seeing inflation spiking around the world due to a number of factors, how well is supply management doing in keeping our dairy price stable? It's totally failed. Not only are supply-managed products rising in price, they're rising faster than any other food products. They should be the slowest to rise if we were supposed to believe those people who said this system is going to work for us. Food produced under the supply management system is more expensive than any other products. Supply management has accomplished the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do. Dairy and egg inflation prices are leading all other foods right now, as prices are rising faster than we've seen since 1983. Milk is up 8%. Cheese over 10%, butter 16%. And these products are essential ingredients in many other processed foods and restaurant dishes. So those prices are going to contribute to higher costs on everything you eat. The other aspect they like to talk about, well, how about protecting the family farm? Proponents of supply management have insisted for decades that small farms would be wiped out and we would be dominated by a small number of corporate farms if we don't maintain the supply management system. Well, in the 1970s, Canada had about 145,000 dairy producers. Today, we have less than 10,000 of them. Expensive dairy quotas ensured that only large corporations and operations were sustainable, and the family dairy operations fell by the wayside. Most of those massive dairy farms are in Quebec, of course, and that's a large factor in why conservative and liberal politicians alike are terrified of speaking out against this rotten system. The average Canadian dairy farm, by the way, nets $5 million a year. That's net, people, not gross. We aren't talking about the little mom-and-pop operations of yesteryear. Dairy farmers love to plead poverty, but the statistics just don't show it. While dairy producers around the world enjoy broad export markets and have flourishing small cottage producers who make creative products such as specialty cheeses and ice creams, Canada languishes with high prices, poor variety, and bans small producers from entering the market. We can't pretend it's impossible to get rid of this rotten system of government control either. New Zealand and Australia had systems just like ours, and they got rid of them. New Zealand's agricultural sector flourished when they got rid of supply management as new export opportunities appeared. Getting rid of the supply management system can't be done overnight. It's going to take some years, and current producers will have to be compensated for the quotas they're reliant upon. It can be done, though, and there's no better time to start down that road to deregulation than right now. Canadians have been ripped off by supply management to the tune of over $600 per year per family for decades, and this is only going to get worse as we stunt our local food production in order to protect a small number of corporate operations. There just isn't any excuse left any longer to protect the archaic, inefficient supply management system in Canada. It doesn't protect us from worldwide price fluctuations. It doesn't protect small domestic farms, and it certainly doesn't do Canadian consumers any favors. Canada is one of the most vast and rich agricultural lands on Earth. We should be one of the world's leading dairy producers and poultry and egg producers with a vast array of products and exporting around the world. Instead, we've limited product options. We have growing factory farm operations, and we're hardly touching our export potential. And that's all due to supply management. Beef, pork, grain, even mushroom producers operate without a supply management system. Why is it apparently impossible for dairy, egg, chicken, and turkey producers to do so? Are they really that incompetent? They can't compete in the world market? Then maybe it's time to flush them aside and let real producers get in there. We need to tackle inflation on many fronts. The world's heading into tough times, and we're not going to be immune from them. One of the most obvious and effective moves we could do to reduce the food cost burden among Canadian consumers would be to end our terrible supply management system. Now, if we only had some politicians with the balls to do it. That's what's got me going today as we watch the inflation numbers. Let's talk to our news editor, Dave Naylor, and see what else is going to get me worked up today. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Good, Cory. I'm sure I got lots of stuff to get you worked up. What have you got planned for Earth Day tomorrow?
For Earth Day? I was thinking I was going to burn some packing peanuts in my fire pit out front.
Yeah, that would work. Don't you have some trees to chop down?
Well, there's always some, but, we'll see. I want to broaden my plans out and make a day of it.
All right, good for you. Well, we've got a cornucopia of content already on the site this morning. Russia has just announced they have banned Premier Jason Kenney from going there. I'm sure his holiday plans are now ruined, but because of the tough Alberta stance that Kenney has taken against the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, has got him on the blackball list, along with various other Canadian politicians like Trudeau, and actually most MPs are now banned from traveling to Russia. The Buffalo Project, a sort of a Western-based group keeping the eye on things for policies affecting their West, have done an early report card on the Conservative leadership race. Pierre Poilievre is the only one that gets straight A's, F's for a few of them, and I think Jean Charest gets a D-, so not very good grades for most of them at the moment. And James Topp, you remember, he's the Canadian veteran, former RCMP employee who was walking across Canada to protest COVID vaccines. He has reached Regina and met with a crowd of supporters there. So our Lee Harding was down there for that and got the story up already. Speaking of Jean Charest, he has announced some healthcare policies that will, what he says, will end the cycle of lockdowns caused by COVID. The Saskatchewan NDP is demanding the Saskatchewan Party try and do something on inflation in the province. It jumped in just 1 month, 1 full percentage point to 5.7% from 4.7%. So inflation is starting to hit the people of Saskatchewan hard, and our Christopher Olcorn has a story on that. U.S. judge, remember last week, struck down the mask mandates for airlines and trains and whatnot. The Department of Justice in the States has appealed it. So that'll be heading back to court soon. There was some hope last night, Cory, that the unvaccinated amongst us would be able to go to the States starting today, because they would have had to, or they would have considering dropping their vaccine mandates on entry. But it turns out it was a false hope. The Homeland Security put out a statement around midnight saying that no, you still have to be vaccinated to get into the U.S. An Edmonton lawyer has been named a new judge by the Trudeau government. And in fact, he is a Liberal donor, as most judges who are appointed seem to be these days. And Pierre Poilievre in a press conference down in Toronto was talking about affordable housing. He says he's going to fire the gatekeepers at City Hall and replace it with sort of a building bonus. Every house the city builds, they would get like 10 grand or something like that. So interesting policy on housing. So later on to come, in a few minutes, our Eva is going to be publishing a story on the Queen's birthday. My old drinking partner, the Queen, turned 96. I was fortunate enough in Calgary when she visited to have a gin and tonic with her at a reception back in the 90s. So it's her 96th birthday. So God save the Queen. Long may she rule, Cory.
Well, she's hanging in there, and I think she's among the last of the, I think, still broadly respected and valued members of the royal family. As you said, I'm not a big monarchist, but I have respect for the Queen and do hope she stays in there as long as we can.
Yeah, we've got some poll numbers coming out that show Canadians, once that this Queen is gone, they're more than willing to get rid of the monarchy, which I personally think would be a shame, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, as a side note, I was on supply management and dairy and everything and the shooting costs of milk. And I know we've been experiencing problems here with that. There's been a milk bandit on the loose who has made off with your milk supply here. That shows, when you take a commodity, make it expensive, you start getting crime involved. And this has even become local for us.
Well, it has, Cory. I brought in a container of milk brand new on Monday for my afternoon cups of tea and a chocolate digestive biscuit. And I took a little bit, then I put it back in the fridge. And by the end of the day, a good chunk of it was gone. So I was a bit worried there. And then I had a little bit more on Tuesday. But when I got there on Wednesday, it was all gone. The container and everything was gone. And I'd only had like 2 small cups of tea out of it. So there is a milk thief on the loose in the office, and I'm going to get the bastard.
Well, I know you're on the hunt, but I just like to show those home examples of what happens when we shake up a commodity and create disorder and crime. So hopefully that comes to a peaceful resolution within the Western Standard offices eventually, and you can enjoy your milk in peace.
If somebody just wants to send me a note apologizing, we'll call it case closed.
Great. Okay, thanks, Dave. I'll check in with you after the show. All right.
You bet.
There we go. We're searching for the dairy bandit around here. So, lots breaking in the news, lots of things going on. And as Dave was laying out, lots of stories coming up and stories that we've already published. So this is the time when I remind everybody, if you want to see full unfettered access to all those stories, we got a lot of columns, opinions, stuff like that going up, as well as breaking news. We have reporters across the country. You got to take out a membership. Yes, we have some options to get some free samples, sort of, but then you do have the dreaded paywall. But it's well worth it, For less than an old newspaper subscription, you can get full access to dozens and dozens of daily stories, unique stuff. I mean, we have our own reporters. We get out there on the ground, some great columnists, some great opinion, and that's how we can keep doing it. I mean, we've been doing great. We got a fantastic number of subscribers. It's growing, and we can always use more, though. This is how independent media can stay independent. I'm going to be talking to the panel about that right away on that. So if you haven't subscribed already, there's that coupon code triggered. You'll save another $10. Hey, save some money. Milk's getting expensive. If you want to buy a jug of milk, use that coupon code, and you could probably afford like a jug and a half with today's prices or something like that. Get on there, take out a subscription, and I really do appreciate it, those who have, and appreciate those who will. And hey, share the word, spread it around. As well, we rely on our sponsors, and I should reach out and speak to about one of them too, and that's Bitcoin Well. These guys have been a great sponsor for us for quite some time now. They are a Western Canadian company, a local company. They aren't taking subsidies. They aren't supply managed. And what they're about is helping you control your own wealth. Get it out of the hands of the government. Keep your money safe. Hedge yourself against inflation. I mean, there's no guarantees, but you're getting out of the conventional currency. But how do you do it? It sounds confusing. It's odd. You worry about ripoffs. That's where Bitcoin Well comes in. They're a local company. They offer one-on-one service. Like that. That's the thing. That's how, unfortunately, so much trust is lost with companies. It's some distant call center. It's a PDF. It's a chat window. No, these guys will sit down, free, one-on-one, in person, and show you how you can get set up with digital currencies with Bitcoin. They're based out of the West. They have services all across Canada. They have ATMs across Canada. They make digital currency practical for you. So it's not just some foreign thing that doesn't seem to make sense. It's a product that you may or may not be interested in. The main thing is reach out to them, check them out, bitcoinwell.com, and they will show you if that's the product for you or not. Okay, so I'm going to go on to, and we're going to run right away with, as I said, I'm afraid I had to record it. We do everything live whenever possible, but in this case, we did have to record it because it's hard to get Andrew and Sheila and myself all available at the same time. So we had a great conversation about media control, independent media, what the federal government has been doing, stepping on us. And, we're all kind of in the same boat. And I think if anything's going to make the establishment quiver, think about it. Outlets like The Rebel, like Western Standard, like True North, hey, we're all growing and we're working together. We're not unionizing, but we're together in solidarity. So let's run that, and I'll chat a little bit in the conversation box there while that's going, and then we'll come back and talk after that. Right, well, welcome to a special presentation and alliance of independent media outlets. We have Sheila Gunn Reid from Rebel News and Andrew Lawton from True North, along with me here with the Western Standard, all in one spot at the same time. So good to see you all together at the same time, guys.
Yeah, the Competition Bureau will be busting this up any minute now.
Yeah, thanks for having us on the show.
Yeah, that might be the next thing, is some sort of media antitrust, but of course they'll start with the smaller players rather than...
Come and get us. That's I believe, the Rebel mantra, and we'll take it on as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. And it looks like they're trying to come and get us all, but I guess I'll just kind of start the discussion. We've got a world where the government is obsessed with controlling information and media. I think we all kind of agree with that. We've got a number of attacks on a number of fronts, C-18, C-11. But the most recent, where they are the ones, the arbiters of who apparently is approved media or is real media and who isn't. And maybe I'll get Sheila to explain that. They've rejected Rebel. They don't consider you guys news. Not that you ever really asked their permission.
Yeah, that's the thing. We don't generally ask their permission to do, anything. But let me first thank the both of you for your interest in our struggles with the Qualified Canadian Journalism Organization designation, because in the before times, in the olden times, I don't know, 7 years ago, maybe, all the media landscape would be up in arms defending the free press. And that's not the case anymore. Even when I was assaulted at the legislature back in 2017, there was nearly unanimous support that people should probably keep their hands off of journalists. But I don't think if I were assaulted now that would happen, that they would rally around us. So with regard to our denial of being designated as a qualified Canadian journalism organization, we are suing the government. People can see our documents at wearesuing.ca. The government had a bit of a witch trial for us. It took them a year, wherein they went through 276 of our news stories, which I think is kind of funny because many of those stories, we were probably highly critical of the government censors. So they had to watch our criticism of them, which brings me a lot of joy. But 276 of our stories, which actually is quite a small number because we probably do that much journalism in a month, in a slow month even. And they decided that only 1% of what we do at Rebel News qualifies as journalism, which is odd to me because I primarily work in access to information, which is, original source documents. We have teams live streaming. I think this is particularly noticeable during the truckers convoy. We're out there, asking politicians questions, interviewing protesters. It's news. It's just news the government doesn't agree with. And so they've denied us this designation. Now, is that going to change the work that we do? Yes and no. We don't ask the government permission to do our work, but it will give them the ability to limit our attendance to press conferences. Now, that's not going to stop us from asking those same politicians questions. If our journalists have to jump out from behind a potted plant in the lobby of a hotel, fine. But the politicians are not going to skirt accountability by keeping us out. And it will also give social media giants and search engines the ability to downrank us, which makes it harder for people to find the work that we do. And since we are on the internet, it could spell a death sentence for us. But it also, and I think the one that is most atrocious to me, is that our subscribers will not be treated equally and fairly under the Income Tax Act, because it will not allow our subscribers, our paid subscribers at $8 a month. I think that's a bargain, by the way. It won't give them the ability to write off their subscription to us because we don't have this designation, which I think is wholly unfair. It's punishing our paid subscribers for disagreeing with the government, and we live and breathe on our supporters. The only reason Rebel News exists is because time and time again, whenever we are faced with challenges like this, an army of people who sometimes disagree with us say, we need you to live on to provide a counterbalance to the mainstream media. Those people are now being punished because the government hates the work that we do at Rebel News.
Yeah, it's across the board. It's interesting that you brought up how the other media outlets, and again, I do remember them rallying back when you did get assaulted that time, and the silence now. But you see, you've got mainstream outlets, legacy outlets that are beholden to this status, and they're a little less inclined to rock the boat, perhaps. So, like Andrew, do you think there's a chilling effect, and has this impacted you guys at all at True North then?
Oh, very much so. And I know I've told this story to my own audience, but I'll share it with yours as well. Back in 2019, Sheila and I were covering for our respective outlets the Global Conference for Media Freedom, which Canada was co-hosting in London, England, with the United Kingdom government. And this is a media freedom conference. Chrystia Freeland, the foreign minister at the time, was making this a bit of a pet project for her. And she was having this press conference after having made herself available in no fora to answer media questions. And Sheila and I both showed up dutifully for the press conference, along with reporters from CTV and CBC and the Globe and Mail and Al Jazeera. And oddly, the room must have been a very weird one because it had room for all but two journalists. And the two where it wasn't CBC that they didn't have room for. Well, I mean, I'm a big guy, so maybe they didn't have room for me, but Sheila's not, and they didn't have room for her either. So I take from that there's a very clear judgment that the government is executing as far as you are not a journalist if we don't like your coverage. And it has nothing to do with the inputs that Sheila described earlier of filing access to information requests, attending press conferences, asking questions, writing stories. They don't like the outputs. They don't like the types of stories you cover. They don't like that. And the Media Freedom Conference incident was remarkable because of how brazen it was. And because it was so brazen, the great part of the story was that all of the other reporters threatened to boycott the press conference unless we were allowed in. And I don't know if that would have happened in Canada or even in the years since that happened. But it was a very, very marked display of solidarity. But you fast forward, and in the 2019 election, Justin Trudeau would not let me cover his campaign. The Leaders Debates Commission banned Rebel and True North from attending the debate. We had to get a court order. Things got a little bit better last year when True North was allowed to cover the debate, but Rebel was still denied and had to sue and won and ultimately got to be there. So all of these things are showing that the government is not prepared to recognize what journalism is unless they happen to like the specific products of it. And I think that's the challenge here, is that there is no license to be a journalist in Canada. In the UK, they have not a license, but they have this National Journalist Association card that is effectively serving as a license, where if you can't produce one of those, you won't be allowed into a lot of events. And in Canada, press freedom has been benefited by not having anything like that in the past. Like, we're seeing the problems, though, because with the convoy, especially on the last day, the Sunday, whatever it was, after the protests had been broken up, walking down the street, police were threatening to arrest people, except if you were a journalist, you were allowed to stay there. But then they'd say, well, prove you're a journalist. And it's like, well, I mean, what do you want me to, like, how can I prove it? I don't have a license. I don't have a permit. One cop let me go through when he saw my verified Twitter profile. Another required a letter from my editor that I had to show him on my phone. Another just didn't let me pass at all. But this is the problem in Canada, is that press freedom is so subjective, and independent journalists in particular who don't have the approved opinions are the ones that bear the brunt of this.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad Sheila brought up, like, we focused a lot at the Standard on pointing out, that it's the subsidies and the bailouts and a lot of programs that a status would qualify for. And, we like to rub their noses in it and take pride in saying we're not taking them even if we qualify. But there's much, much more to it. that people don't typically see. I mean, this is their ways that they could throttle your access to events, to government functions, to areas where news is breaking, as Andrew said, such as the protests, and that really undercuts a media organization or write-offs for subscribers. People don't see that. And most of all, as you mentioned, we're all beholden to these social media giants. It's just the reality of the new media. I mean, we never would have been able to have the capital to make freestanding broadcast units like the past and things like that. So this new social media is great that way. But if you get delisted or run afoul of Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, that can impact us very heavily. And if they start making their ratings based on Canada's qualified journalists, they can really make you live or die.
Yeah. And I would add that, I've had issues in the past where I've been looking for my own stories, things that I know I've written, and I'll Google the story and I remember the headline, I remember the keywords. I'll even Google with tnc.news, which is True North domain name, and the story doesn't come up. Or it comes up, but it's buried beneath a bunch of unrelated things. And then I say, okay, well, am I the problem? Is the algorithm the problem? Is the outlet the problem? But we know there's manipulation taking place, and we know that the big tech companies are, in fact, operating in a way that is not transparent, and oftentimes at the expense of conservative-leaning outlets.
Yeah, I've got a really great example of this. People can do this for themselves. Go onto YouTube, open up the YouTube search, and type Rebel News, and you won't get a hit on a story that has millions of views that we've done. You'll get criticism of us first that has tens of thousands of views. That's how they tweak these algorithms to downlist us. And what this QCJO designation does is it basically codifies the requirement to downlist us and to hide us from people who want to see us. And you couple this sort of downlisting that's going to be codified in the designation, along with Bill C-18, which is the Online News Act, which is really the Online Shakedown Act, that will require payments from these social media giants to creators for linking to the content. People just aren't going to link to you. That's what's going to happen. I mean, it's just censorship by another way.
It's really troublesome. I'm going to ask, I'll start with Andrew. It brought something to mind just as we were talking, but it chafes on me as a libertarian. I kind of like the Wild West of how it is out there, but could this be solved by some sort of balanced actual licensing scheme? I mean, something where maybe the applications, I don't like more licenses or regulations for anything, so this is hard for me to say, but where it was just based on having a registered company and having a formal location and just a couple of things, content aside, but just a basis to say that you are media. Because I mean, I do understand the police are clearing a scene. They do need to know, are you just another protester or even instigator who's pretending to be media, or are you real? There could be some value in this. We just don't want the government to be the ones determining it.
Yeah, and I understand it, but I would caution people going down that road, partially on my libertarian grounds as well, but also because we just don't see this space being as crowded as people like to think. And to go back to the example I gave earlier of the Liberals barring me in the 2019 campaign, I was actually flying around where the Liberals were going, trying to cover Justin Trudeau's press conferences. And one of the excuses that was given to me by Justin Trudeau's press secretary was, well, we can't just allow anyone who says they're media to come in because then everyone's going to come. And I said, look around. I'm the only one you're turning down. You don't have, Bobby Joe, the blogger, flying to Vancouver to cover this campaign. You don't have random people that are showing up in droves. The people that are here are people that are journalists. The only difference is you're deciding based on not liking my coverage that I don't fit that bill, when at other events they were letting in student journalists, for example. So I think generally speaking, people tend to overstate how much there is at the floodgates waiting if you were to open the floodgates. I don't think it is huge, because doing good journalism, as Sheila knows, is costly. I mean, theoretically, you can do it sitting from your computer, but to do the bootstraps journalism on the ground, to take the time to do the investigative journalism, it comes with a cost. And a lot of companies and a lot of individuals aren't doing that. So I think that any effort to define or regulate in any way is really a solution in search of a problem. And I think that when you talk about the implications of it, government censorship and regulation are bad. Big tech problems are very much a force. It's government empowering big tech that creates a new category of problem that removes the government accountability, but has still the force of law. And we see this with censorship. I mean, the only thing worse than Facebook or Twitter censoring is doing it because they've been deputized by the government. And I think that's the inevitable byproduct of any sort of licensing regime, is it basically makes all these tech companies, web hosts, domain registrars, state enforcers.
I just want to add to Andrew's comment because, I really think the answer to this, like both of you are pointing out, it's not more government, it's not more regulation. It's exactly what we're doing here today. It's the independent press gallery as a counterbalance to the parliamentary press gallery. And Andrew's right when he points out that journalism really is a sunset industry. Cory, you'll know this. If you are not a journalist in Alberta that is working for either Rebel News or Western Standard or True North, then you work for Post Media. It's really a media monopoly here. And when we applied for access to the Alberta Legislature Press Gallery, the competitors, our competitors at Post Media basically held a witch trial for myself and Cian Bexty. They got together and without us presenting arguments or saying, hey, we're not as bad as you have cooked up in your mind that we are, they did a secret vote and wouldn't let us in. So, the answer is not giving the power to censor to the government, and it's not giving the power to censor also to a guild of your competitors, which is what happened to us at the legislature in Alberta. But it also was how the government passed the buck off to blocking us from the debates. They said, this is put together by the Debates Commission. You can't get access to the parliament because the PPG is in charge of that. Well, the PPG is a bunch of bailout journalists reliant on the government for their survival. So they're going to do whatever the government wants them to do. I'm with you when you say it must be the wild, wild west, and competition will weed out those who cannot survive by doing good journalism. They'll just go by the wayside. It is expensive. And if you can't do journalism, you'll just go on and do other things. It's the free market at work. The answer is not giving control over what you do to either the government or the people who you exist as a counterbalance to.
Yeah, well, and as Andrew pointed out, I guess it's a solution looking for a problem. I mean, if we did see media events overwhelmed by a number of self-styled independent journalists, which are still fine, but if it's becoming that large a queue going on, then perhaps to address it at that time. But until, if and when that happens, because you pointed out the pitfalls of having an organization or an industry type of regulation as well. Again, especially the whole thing comes down to that qualified Canadian journalism thing, though. It makes them beholden. They don't want to rock the boat. Even if you're within media and they might be sympathetic to the independent outlets, they're not going to feel inclined to be nice to them. I hate to say it.
No, and I'm not a fan of big tech companies at all. I think there are a lot of issues there that need to be dealt with. But the QCJO and the Bill C-18 provisions make me, believe it or not, sympathetic to the Facebooks and the Googles and the Twitters, because C-18 in particular.
What a miracle.
Pardon me?
I said it's a miracle, but I felt the same way.
The enemy of my enemy of my enemy of my enemy is eventually a loose acquaintance, I think. But what happens is the tech companies will need to pay, as Sheila mentioned earlier, these media companies that are government approved if they link to them. And by link to, I don't even mean they had to do it. Like if the Toronto Star sets up a Facebook page and links to itself on Facebook, Facebook needs to pay the Toronto Star somehow. And we've decided that the Toronto Star is not making a decision. The Toronto Star is somehow being exploited by Facebook. Google, which is a search results index that lets people search for things, will now have to pay for the privilege of including something in its search. These outlets want eyes on them. These outlets are using social media. So why has the government decided that these companies, which by the way, do not need news sites, I forget the exact number, but I think like news makes up less than 10% of Facebook's business, if I recall from the Australia case where this happened. Like they need memes and cat videos and influencers and people saying what they had for dinner that day. They don't need the Toronto Star. They don't need CBC. They don't need CTV. So the fact that these companies owe anything to the news industry in Canada is absolutely laughable.
Yeah, and I had what was it? Peter Menzies on a little while back talking about that, and he was with the CRTC, and he was a publisher, and he's just horrified with where it's going. And he called it a shakedown. That was the term he used. They're shaking down the social media giants with this. I mean, you're forced providers in a sense, and that's not going to make the environment any more healthy. I listened to an interesting podcast on Canada Land, which ideologically is quite different than myself, but I respect them as another independent outlet, and they're certainly never afraid of being critical of the government either. And they spoke to one of the people on that committee for it, and it was just so clear on how arbitrary the closed doors decisions were on who is going to qualify and who isn't as well. So, I mean, there are independent media outlets that understand this on any side of the political spectrum, but how do you think we can push back against this? I mean, we saw a conservative government, I hate to say it, will be just as happy to shut down critical media as a liberal one if given the chance. That's just their nature. So I'll start with Sheila. Like, what could we do though? How can we fight this? You guys are going to court. Are there other ways we can push back?
Well, I think for us, the most important thing is to get this in front of a judge again. Every time that we drag the Liberals in front of a judge, particularly on free press issues, we continue to win. So this will be, I'm predicting, our third victory, because as you rightly point out, it's so arbitrary. How do we meet requirements when we don't know what the requirements are? I mean, the idea that some government censor was making, $120,000 a year plus benefits to go through 276 of our stories, which is just a light smattering of the work we do, to decide that none of it was news. Only 1% of it was news. I probably get 10% of my stories stolen by the mainstream media. So how do they say that it's just 1%? But for us, Ezra Levant, release the lawyers. For us, that's the best way. But we are taking on the government with the deepest pockets in the land. They have all the money in the world to fight our little independent news agency. They just keep rounding up lawyers and lawyers. But like I said off the top of the show, we live and breathe on our supporters. And we have this army of people out there who just come through time and time again, who want us to live on and want us to fight the government another day and tell the other side of the story. So we're just so grateful for that. But it's also things like this where, we are, I guess, competitors in the same space, but I think a rising tide floats all boats. And it's not like the United States where there's this overwhelming saturation of conservative media. It's really just us in Canada that's doing, original source journalism. And we have to stick up for each other. And I think we do.
So, yeah, and likewise, Andrew, are there tools or things you have in mind that we could do to push back? Because this trend, I mean, these are like anything else with government. Once you let it go, it's a lot harder to undo. I mean, we're still in the early stages. We might be able to head this off yet.
Yeah, and I think there certainly needs to be court challenges on this. I mean, True North has never had the legal war chest that Rebel has had, and we also haven't had as much of a need in a lot of cases to unleash the lawyers. But when we were banned from the Leaders Debates Commission, we felt this was something that could not be allowed to stand, and we fought it. And we ended up being accredited in 2021. And while Rebel wasn't, I think perhaps at the next election, maybe they'll have learned their lesson. But I think that there are two aspects of this. One is that individual people who are hearing this need to support independent media with not just your clicks and your shares and your views, which are important, but also with your money. I mean, one thing that even these social media companies with their algorithms are very responsive to is advertising. And we've had sometimes things that we've promoted and put advertising behind. We are on the ground, and I get so many people coming out who have, even at the convoy, that it's, they'd say, oh, where are you from? And I'd say True North. And they'd say, oh, I love True North. Or they'd say, oh, what's that? I haven't heard of it. and then they'd subscribe. So being on the ground and covering things is one of the greatest ways of being an ambassador for independent media in general, because people see that we're actually doing work. And the CBC reporters that are cowering in their offices on Spark Street writing about the convoy through their windows versus people like me and my colleagues that are out there from different outlets interviewing people and showcasing that. So, but we can only do that with people that support us. And when I say that, I don't mean give us $10,000 if you want to, please, but give us $5, give us $2, buy us a cup of coffee. I mean, that's the sort of thing we're doing. So I think that ultimately the audience will be the deciding factor, and the audience is the one trump card that we have, because our audience is growing, the mainstream media audience is not. And that's going to be the great equalizer. But we're going to be up against more and more resistance through policies like the ones we've been talking about.
Well, and sorry to drag this on a little bit, but we must remember that our audiences are experiencing much the same censorship that we as conservative news outlets are too. They are also being deplatformed, kicked off social media, having their posts hidden from others, being told that they are harmful or harassing. So they really do understand what we're going through. And for us at Rebel News, it's so often because we advocate for those normal people out there. But another way that people can fight back is, I don't know if you guys have heard, but there's this conservative leadership campaign happening right now. I think it's important to put the leadership candidates to the test. It's not enough to do the popular, easy conservative thing of saying, oh, I'm going to defund the CBC. Okay, great. Thank you. That's $1.5 billion a year. Thank you. Appreciate that. We shouldn't have to pay for people who, I almost knocked over my microphone. People who hate conservatives. We shouldn't have to pay for that. They're free to say it. I don't want to have to pay for it. That's great. But what are you going to do about Bill C-11? The digital charter? What are you going to do about C-18? What are you going to do about the media bailout, the CBC-ification of the rest of the media? What are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about the Online Streaming Act, where they have left the door wide open for regulation of video games because the government said they play on the same screen? That is literally the logic they used. I saw it in a document. Press the conservative leadership hopefuls on that, because they're not going to get pressed by it or on it by the mainstream media, who are advocating for these laws, but advocating for them to be done quicker and harsher. I think that's another thing that normal people can do, is start hammering your candidates on this stuff.
If I could jump on that as well, one thing I would say, even structurally, conservative politicians need to do a better job at working with independent media, and not just during leadership races. I will say in 2020, Aaron O'Toole had in his leadership platform that he would ensure independent press gallery members had equal standing on Parliament Hill to parliamentary press gallery members, and this was something that came out not long after the IPG was formed. It was great. He never won, so we never got to see if he would have fulfilled that promise. But I can say once Aaron O'Toole was leader, it became pretty much impossible to do an interview with him. I did one with him in December of 2020, and then never again from then until the time he was ousted as leader was I able to have a one-on-one interview with Aaron O'Toole. Premier Jason Kenney has always come on my show when I've asked. I've appreciated that, even if my audience isn't a fan of him at various points. During leadership races, all the candidates, Leslyn Lewis, Pierre Poilievre, Jean Charest, they've all been doing independent media. But whenever you see stories of conservative insiders leaking something, it's always to the Toronto Star, it's to the Globe and Mail, it's to CTV. So they still view the mainstream media as being their conduit to an audience. And if it's a big enough story, as Sheila knows, the mainstream media will steal our coverage anyway. So let us break it first. But that's a big thing. Conservative politicians and the Conservative Party need to start owning up to it. I mean, you guys know that the mainstream media is going to burn you every single time. We aren't going to be sycophants. We'll give you a fair shake, but start leading by example.
Yeah, well, that puts, it's a good way to close off, because it puts some of the onus on ourselves. As long as we make ourselves too big to fail, we give, too much. If we're drawing too much audience as far as it's concerned for the others, they can't shut us out. They can't avoid us. And, we have to, if we're putting out good product, we're going to keep getting those subscribers. And we got to keep reminding people that self-serving plug, sign up for all of them. So maybe we'll close up, just to remind everybody where your shows are, guys. Start with you, Sheila, so people know where to go to find good independent media.
Sure. Majority of our content is available for free. If you want to see the uncensored version, might I suggest not going anywhere near YouTube and on over to Rumble, because there are many things that we cannot publish on YouTube. But if you want to support our independent journalism, you can do that at rebelnewsplus.com. That's our paywalled subscription service. And we've added 2 new shows there, and we didn't up the price. So that's us helping your family fight inflation. And if you'd like to help in our legal battle against Trudeau for denying us our journalism license, ostensibly, you can go to wearesuing.ca, because we are in for truly the fight of our lives.
Right on. And Andrew?
So True North coverage is all at tnc.news. You can subscribe on Facebook and Twitter and Rumble and all of these other platforms. And then I also do my newsletter, which is over at andrewlawton.substack.com.
Right on. And we are, of course, at the westernstandardonline.com, and we're on all those social media majors as well. So I appreciate you guys, responding and us getting together. I'm sure our viewers appreciate seeing the independent media outlets, again, showing some, that term as Sheila used earlier that I still mixed on, is solidarity. And
camaraderie. Let's call it camaraderie.
And that's how we can make sure we just keep that unfettered information getting out there.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, as per Sheila there, we showed some independent media camaraderie there. And I think we do need to stick together. We compete with each other. We're trying to get subscribers. And don't forget, there's nothing to stop any of you from subscribing to more than one of them. So, there's great content coming from the Rebel, coming from True North. And the more we can get stronger, is kind of like we said towards the end of the conversation, we become too difficult to stop, because as we discussed, the government wants to control, they want to stop, they don't like having media out there reporting on things that they can't get a handle on. And all 3 of our outlets do that, and we're going to continue to do that. And it's ridiculous that the government thinks that they're in some sort of position to say who is or who isn't an actual media outlet. So it was a great conversation we had, and I hope we can get more of those going in the future with all 3 of us together like that. We're all pushing for a common cause. So next I'm going to have coming in studio and in person here. This will be live. So we've gone from, my recorded one to a live person in studio. And this was a Conservative Party of Canada declared candidate, Elizabeth Claire Lewis. The deadline has passed. So I'm afraid Elizabeth didn't make it into the mix, but there's still plenty of federal issues to talk about. And we could see what Ms. Lewis wanted to do and still wants to do, I imagine, and see in Canadian politics. So, hey there, Liz, or Elizabeth, I should say, and I don't like to get too casual, I guess, but thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Liz is fine. That's actually what I go by. So one of the big reasons that I think that I wanted to enter this conversation with the Conservative Party was to really have some good dialogue about medical freedoms and the problems in our medical system and what we can do to fix them. So one of the things that I was looking at doing is creating a pilot program that would allow, first of all, to help educate the public about how to read a basic blood work page, because that's what mostly you get done. And to take away some of the controls from the doctors and give them back to people. So those controls, for example, would be being able to order your own blood work. It would save actually up to about 40% of the physician costs that are incurred if you were just able to start at the beginning, order your blood work, and then go to the doctor for a prescription, or even better, if it's something simple like a bacterial infection, you could just be able to get a direct prescription from a lab directly to your pharmacy, and then you would save 2 doctor visits. That would be $80 you'd save in just that one transaction per patient. So the other thing that's really important about that is that it gives you the ability to kind of pump your own gas. And I think there's a lot of people that do not like being over-nannied. And so that helps in that situation. It helps people take control of their health and their health choices. The other thing about it that I was looking is making sure you have checks and balances in the medical and social systems, so that you have so that you don't have a problem where you have an overbearing doctor who's decided something for you, Mental health diagnoses are a great example of that, because most of them are they're by exclusion, but the problem is the doctors don't exclude all the stuff. So it would really be, for me, the really important thing was fixing the standards in medical care, so that some of the disasters that happened to me would never happen to somebody else. I had somebody misdiagnose a stroke for something else, and that was scary. Forgive me that. Forgive me for first time doing this. The other thing was the same situation with social services, because I think a lot of times things get out of control with people because we don't have a system where people can speak up at the beginning and have an almost a legal transaction where they're able to say, where there's a due process in that, and people lose their kids, and people have, these times where the government overreach that has been going on for years. These are places where it can be stopped. So those are a couple of things. For me, the CBC is something that I think should stay, but I think we need to look at it in terms of representation. So since 30% of the population is conservative, 30% of the airtime should represent conservative speakers. And that way you have a much more equal conversation. And the last thing that I was going to talk about is taxes. And so one of the ideas that I had for taxes and questions I had about taxes was, why is it that if the government can, if an employer can only make you work for 40 hours a week, why is it that for all the immigrants and people that have to work 2 jobs, why is it the government can tax you on more than 40 hours? And that can add up to a lot. So for example, that overtime work that, a 20-something an hour employee does adds up to about 35 days that he could have been spending with his family, that he's given to the government for free because he needed to work longer than 40 hours. So those are a few of the points I was looking at.
So the race is ongoing at this point. As I said, unfortunately, you didn't make the bar
No.
for entry. Are you still participating with the party, though? I mean, are you going to get involved with another campaign, or are you undecided at this point? As the issues carry on.
I'm also a board member for UCP. So UCP. So I look at that, and there's always the possibility of running down the road, either here or in the States, because I have an American green card. So, but and also it's also I'm kind of involved with writing to some of the MLAs and MPs about some of the other issues that I have. One was talking with Whitney Isaac the other day about women's safety and getting proper medical post-rape care. So that kind of a big, heavy topic.
Well, and that's I mean, and you're interested in a broad spectrum of political things, and you headed for the federal leadership, so you're still involved provincially, as you said, because a lot of the things you're talking about would fall under provincial jurisdiction, healthcare reforms, things like that. What if, I mean, the blood work sounds interesting, for example, but then what's the control to keep somebody from abusing it? Is it, we've got, we have to hate to admit, but some hypochondriacs out there who say, I want to get my blood tested every couple of days because I'm just worried that every day I've got something going on. The oversight of a physician, as much as it's expensive and can be problematic, is also, it does serve a purpose.
Well, that's actually pretty quick, pretty easy. For example, if you see somebody going and asking for things where there's no, where there's nothing, where the blood work is fine, you can put a stop on that. You can say, digitally basically, and say, fella, you've had 5 tests that have all shown that everything is clear, and this is where we stop it. And the converse can happen when there's a problem with a patient. And one of the big problems that we had in BC, and is the fact that Vancouver, I don't know if you know this, but Vancouver General Hospital is a grade D hospital. That's the lowest you can get. That's their biggest hospital system, Vancouver Coastal Health. And so the comparison between kind of conservative healthcare and liberal healthcare is massive. Alberta, for example, has 11 A and A plus hospitals. I mean, that's the best in the West. And compare that to BC that has none. And compare that to BC where there's a problem when patients go in and they have clear, they'll have like a white count of like 15.9 and they don't get medical attention. In fact, there was a young girl that died there about a year ago. I don't know if you remember the story, who had gone in with a small cyst that was a staph infection. She asked the doctor to check it, went into Lionsgate Hospital 5 times, and it wasn't checked. So one of the things that we really need to do in terms of the checks and balances is dealing with these issues of soft denial of services, so that when you see a case like that it could automatically flag, and you could get in a doctor who knows what they're doing. And so the protection can work on both sides of that issue.
Yeah, well, and part of our problem is I mean, we got some fantastic professionals. Once somebody gets in, the problem is we have massive waiting lists to get in, whether it was in the emergency room itself or at a walk-in clinic or any of those sorts of things. So, I mean, how could we avoid that overload? Because as much as we'd like to, get people in faster, the resources are kind of stretched to the maximum right now.
Well, one of the things that you could do with things is educate the public a little more, so that there's a part of it that they can take care of themselves. Anyone should be able to take care of a urinary tract infection just by going to the lab, having a quick test, and it's going to show what it is. You don't even you can be doctorless there. And then all of a sudden that frees up all of that doctor time for patients that really need it, elderly patients, people that have difficulty communicating, people who, that have, maybe, mental challenges that make it hard. But there's a heck of a lot that we could actually take into our own hands, because it's really high school level science. There's a huge part of it that is high school level science, and that's where it should be taught, rather than some of the more peculiar ideas that are being taught today.
So what about expanding abilities for pharmacists? I mean, they're medical professionals as well. And I know there's been some work towards that to try and say, well, we can allow them to prescribe for certain things. I mean, you don't want to have them prescribing for something that needs some medical testing to be sure of and things like that. But I know there's been issues with people who need regular medications. They need the same medication, the same amount month after month. They can't get more than a month at a time, and they have to keep going to the doctor to get a new prescription. I mean, you want periodic checks, of course, but it seems that we keep sending people into these doctors over and over. We don't necessarily need to. No,
we don't. And it is certainly, I mean, in BC, they do have the possibility of doing a 3-month prescriptions for most things. I know my insulin was like that. And also, there's also another thing that should be considered about it, is that there's a lot of diseases that have, like if you have a cancer patient, they're also going to automatically need things like antifungal drugs and easier access to antibiotics, because they're higher risk. And so if you carte blanche do something like approve it, then you don't have to jump through the same hoops, because then you have a more focused care for that particular patient class, and it speeds things up. And again, if you're in that situation, like if you're a cancer patient, things go fast, and you need to be able to access those medications quickly. And once we know what they are, you have at the same time, the same thing with patients that have recurring UTIs. You can just get that approved, and then they should be able to just get what they need when they need it.
So outside of health and some of the communications, what was your top priority in your campaign when you were trying to get things rolling?
So one was looking at revising some of the taxes, which I mentioned with the 40%, because the thing about the taxes is it's an interesting thing, but the Liberals kind of wrote it for themselves, and so it benefits them. And one of the things that I was looking at and really wanting to talk about is a gradient tax system, where it's almost like you're able to say you're at grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and look at really trying to get people from one level to the next in a secure way. And so one of the things that I really think is important, especially for low-income disabled people, is for them to be able to purchase their own house, not to be stuck in a sometimes dangerous government housing. And it makes a big difference in your stability because, and I'll use again the BC example, which I have seen happen many times with the mentally ill and with people who have intermittent illnesses, is that they will go and they'll be in their apartment for a few years, and then they have perhaps some sort of incident. Maybe it was pot related, maybe it was just a bipolar thing, or something happens in their lives, and they end up in one of these hospitals for they'll call it a long-term stay, so it could be more than 2 weeks. Well, what winds up happening in that situation is the government no longer pays on the apartment. They lose the apartment and they go back into the system, and it contributes to this. That if you want to understand the cycle of homelessness in Canada, especially in places like BC, it's these terrible Liberal NDP policies that don't build on stability. So that's a big one for me. And the other thing, it was funny listening to, was it Daniel Smith yesterday talking about the inflation issues, is you can actually, if you think about it, that we have the gold standard, it's actually on housing that the hyperinflation started. And it started in places like Vancouver, where you've got what is essentially a $40,000 house selling for like over $1 million. When people come up from the States, they laugh like crazy about this. If you've ever had it, and I have, and I tell them that's $1 million house, and they just lose it. But it's, and you understand it because it's the only warm place in Canada, sure. That definitely makes sense. But the fact is that if you want stability in a nation, you have to provide some laws to create stability in the housing prices to prevent the flipping, because that's where the hyperinflation comes from. And then in a lot of ways, housing is our gold. It is the thing that the commodity that drives other prices. Because if you can't afford to live somewhere,
housing is a very basic one and a big driver for inflation in general. And that's been a big issue in the leadership race, and it probably will be in the next election. Mm-hmm. So I guess in closing, though, you're going to remain politically active. You've got stuff on the go. Where can people find information on what you're doing these days and, to follow up and take part?
Sure. Sorry for cutting off. I have 2 websites, Elizabeth Claire Lewis, and the Claire has an I in it, .com. And the second one is conservativespounce.com, which I was kind of looking at doing a little vlog like you guys are doing. Mm-hmm. And I have some silly merchandise making fun of Trudeau and that you might have a laugh at.
Well, making fun of Trudeau is something that's always very popular around here. So I appreciate you're throwing your hat in the ring and staying politically active. And, that's how we get things done. It's from the bottom up. So thanks for coming in to talk to me today, Elizabeth. And we'll perhaps talk down the road.
Cheers. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on, that was, again, Elizabeth Claire Lewis. She was running for the Conservative Party of Canada, didn't get in quite in time to make the full run, but she's still quite active and has many political goals and ideas. She's an active person out there. So let's talk about one of our sponsors while we transition here, and that is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Those guys have been an excellent sponsor for us for quite some time now. And if you own firearms, if you're considering owning firearms, this is the place you got to go. I mean, they got all sorts of resources. Their name says it all. They are an association of firearm owners. You can network with other people who enjoy firearms. You can look into local firearms shows, see things like that, updates, videos on the safe operation of firearms. It's all there. It's all things firearm. And hey, if you're serious about anything, you do want to get into an association and make sure you're doing it right. The Canadian Shooting Sports Association offers you all of those options to safely utilize firearms, as well as to stand up for your right and ability to do that, because we do have a government that is trying to take away your property. They are constantly recategorizing, constantly pressing, looking for registries, things like that. It just never seems to stop. Well, if you don't stand up for yourself, if you don't push back, they will take it away. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So get on, join these guys. They got court actions against the Liberals on this. Canadian Shooting Sports Association, their website is cssa-cila.org. And again, the easiest part is just to Google Canadian Shooting Sports Association. It says it all. Take out a membership with them, guys, so they can help you. Okay, so on with our busy news day. So, as Dave was talking about, it was unfortunate. I saw this news story where it was still it was talking about social media was active with claims that the U.S. land borders are going to be open to unvaccinated Canadians as of Thursday night at midnight due to some restrictions expiring. Unfortunately, that turned out not to be true. Like, this hang up. Talk about if we want to work towards economic recovery, getting back to normal, getting back to having a life again. One of the biggest things has got to be opening the bloody borders. I mean, how long have we got to get on this? And it's the Americans are as bad as the Canadians when it comes to this, in that there's no good evidence showing that this has been a big issue. We haven't had big problems. I mean, they're no more infected down there than we are up here messing around. Vaccinations don't make a bloody difference and spread. I mean, again, we debate that, and that's fine. That's what it's about. But I mean, the vaccinations have benefit. I do believe that. And I think people should voluntarily be able to take them up and utilize them. But I know as well as anybody, we see that it doesn't stop the spread. So what's the point of these bloody border mandates? And the governments are hung up on them, particularly Trudeau, of course. I think it's a point of pride with him almost now, but little pride that guy should have. But I don't know how long it's going to take until we get these bloody regulations down. They're hurting us, guys. They're hurting us a lot. Again, we talk about inflation. They pay lip service to why everything's costing so much. They talk about how people are having a hard time. One of the areas, that they love talking about supply chains, a critical part of it's trucking, and that's still an area with a whole bunch of labor, a whole bunch of people on both sides of the border who can't bring those goods and services across. And look, certainly there's many who can, but when you take a whole bunch out of the mix, you reduce the supply, you reduce the ability, and the prices go up. This isn't that complicated, or it shouldn't be. But the governments will not back down on that. I don't know what it takes. Speaking of governments that won't back down on anything, one of the things that started with my rant, as I said, there were no politicians with the courage to take on supply management. When I had Polyev on, I asked him about it. He said he would keep it. I had Leslie Lewis on. She actually gave some of those myths about Canadian or about American milk and dairy being unhealthy. That's not true. That's a bunch of bull crap that the dairy cartels spread constantly. They have, it's just as healthy in the private market, guys. If you listen to these crazed cartels and their defense of it, they say, oh my God, it'll go to hell in Canada if we don't have this cartel. Well, is beef poisoning people? Pork? I mean, come on, guys, enough of the BS. If your industry can't stand on its own 2 feet and provide safe product to us without government managing you, you don't deserve to be in business. I'm tired of their excuses. Sick to death of them, as a matter of fact. It's a bunch of crap. But they're a very effective lobby. And they got hundreds of millions of dollars. They spend that on lobbying. That's money that could go towards production. They spend it on lobbying. Every conservative leadership candidate, the first thing they get a phone call from is the dairy lobby. Every time. These guys are good at what they do. And we saw that with Maxime Bernier and O'Toole. Not O'Toole. Oh, man, I'm going back 2 races. Bernier, why am I forgetting the other guy who was in for a little while? He is forgettable. And he was the other conservative leader. He won by 1% by kissing the butts of the dairy lobby. And now, of course, conservatives are terrified of Andrew Scheer, of course. They're terrified of taking on that dairy lobby. And so even ones who claim to be conservative will not touch this rotten system. And again, think of how stupid it is. Literally, it's 300 or 400. I've looked it up. With chickens that you can own. I know it's a number, but if you own 401 chickens and you don't have a quota, you'll go to jail. Yeah, like technically anyways, and maybe it'll start with a fine and so on. But the bottom line is it's illegal. It's criminal to have more than 400 chickens without a quota, without this special permit from the government that they keep strangled. Same with producing eggs and the rest. Why? Why on earth do we need this? And nobody can make a living on anything less than a few thousand chickens. It doesn't mean you have to be a mega operation with hundreds of thousands of chickens, but you see these mid-range, affordable ones cannot compete. And why? It's ridiculous. It's absurd. We don't have a minimum amount of, you don't have a quota on pigs. We don't have a quota on goats or on cattle, and those industries make it. I'm just tired of the supply management fart catchers who keep making excuses for this broken system. It's a Soviet-style crappy system, and Canada is one of the last countries on the whole planet it still has it. Denise Martin asking, is it Canada-wide? Yeah, it's federal policy. You And I've used that analogy, and I'll use it again for people who haven't heard it before. You know, Jane, my wife, grew up in Rockyford, Alberta, a small dairy operation. And her father had a quota to sell cream, only a certain amount of it, but cream. But he didn't have a quota for milk. So they would milk the cows. And this story is so common, and lots of people in rural communities can share it with you, and they know about it. Milk the cows, skim the cream, sell that, make some bucks for the family. Use the milk as much as you can around the house. If you've got pigs, you'll feed it to the pigs. If you don't, you pour it in the ditch because it's illegal to sell it. That's how stupid it is. And that's really what happens. So, I mean, I'm just tired of defending this. Like I said, Leslie Lewis wouldn't defend it. I had Sheila on. That's not surprising. He wouldn't, I say Lewis wouldn't speak out against the cartels. Sheila predictably wouldn't. And Polyev, unfortunately, I was surprised, but I guess I shouldn't be. He said he would keep the dairy cartels going as well, which is too bad. He's been fantastic on every other front, but nobody can pretend to be a free market conservative and support supply management. You can't. You're lying. You're lying. Supply management is the opposite of free market, the complete opposite. The complete opposite. So do you cherry pick on what you support? Are you, can you be part? No, you can't. You can't be half pregnant, guys. You either support free markets and you don't. If you support this crap, you don't support free markets. I'm not saying it's a reason to fully dismiss one candidate or another. You tend to choose the best of the bunch you can, but it's ridiculous that we can't have a proper discussion on this and just call it out for what it is. It's socialism at its ugliest, at its worst. It's Soviet style, and we need to get rid of it. One of the Conservative Party candidates did come out strongly against it, and that was Scott Aitchison. I haven't had him on yet. I hope I can get him. He's running for the leadership. He's one of the ones who has fully qualified and gone in, and he's the MP for Parry Sound, Muskoka, Ontario. And he called it out for what it is. So it was so refreshing. He said he will kill farm quotas. What were his words? He said longstanding dairy quotas are to blame for spiraling food costs. He's absolutely right. He called it a price fixing system, and that is what it is. I mean, you don't get to choose the price. Again, it's not a free market. A producer doesn't sell it to a distributor or a processor, and then they get to choose their prices. It's set by a cartel. They fix the price. It's funny. This would be illegal in any other industry. Illegal if a bunch of industries got together and set that price. And we know that does happen. And when they get caught, they get spanked for it. But when it's supply management, suddenly it's not a problem. Again, an amazingly effective lobby. Pamela Jones-Kenney saying, could it be that Pierre might address it at some point if he became prime minister? I don't know. I hope so. I mean, I do. But, it's kind of a deceptive way to have to go about things is to say that you'll preserve it for a while until you get in and then change your mind on it. I just prefer open, honest campaigning to call it out for what it is. I mean, I want it gone no matter who gets rid of it. But I mean, we get too much of that from the other side with people who campaign right and then swing left when they get in. So I don't think it's any more principled for somebody to campaign left and then swing right when they get in. And I tell you what, if you're supporting supply management, you're campaigning left, not just a little left, extreme left, because that's Soviet style, as I said. So again, Aitchison, at least with that issue alone, and I know it's not necessarily a deal breaker for people, but I'm glad he brought it up. At least one of these candidates is. And as a quote in him, he said in his campaign statement, what's the end result? Your food costs more, much, much more. So he said he'd repeal the quotas for eggs, poultry, dairy, all of that stuff. He will end supply management for families struggling with their grocery bills. And the price index just keeps jumping. So there's some promise, some of them are at least speaking up. And that's one of them. Now, maybe we'll get some, pressure going the other way. What's that? Cheryl Dawn saying we need a black market dairy and poultry. Well, I've talked about that. When you do restrict things, I was joking with Dave about it. There really is one. There really is. Canada had the mafia involved in cheese smuggling. This sounds like something from the Beaverton or the Onion or one of those publications, but it's true. If you look it up, you Google it up. Canada cheese smuggling. There were actually organized criminals, organized crime was smuggling cheese across the border to supply pizza restaurants in Ontario and Quebec. They got busted for it. That is what happens when you have government forcing, restricting items and messing with the markets. You create a black market or a gray market and things happen. When cigarette taxes were way out of whack in the early 90s, we had massive cigarette smuggling going on in Canada. It wasn't until the taxes were cut before that went down. So we literally have that. We also have it. There's another area that supply managed I didn't talk about. I don't care as much. We don't have it in the West, but still important as any. And that's maple syrup, actually. That's supply managed. Same thing. And we've had mafia and criminal enterprises involved in black market maple syrup. How Canadian do you get? I mean, it's comical and it's funny, but it's still it's dark comedy. You know, we've screwed with our production system so badly that we've brought in black markets and mafia got involved. When I had AJ Galante on, not to say that he's involved with the mafia still or his family is, I don't know, but they know people who know people. I wonder if they've ever been involved in the dairy export to Canada market. But it's ridiculous. Denise Martin said there has to be Hutterites in Alberta to buy from. Most of the Hutterites who are producing large amounts of chicken, eggs, and dairy have quotas. They're in the system. So you can buy from them, but they're part of that corporate farming. In fact, they're a large part of it. The few that we have in the West, most of it's in Quebec, but out West, it's Hutterites who dominate it. Nothing against Hutterites. I have nothing at all against them. But they're in the supply management system. And if they don't have quotas and they're selling it off to the side, it's illegal. Bobby, Wojciech saying you can purchase unpasteurized milk in Australia. And yeah, Australia had a supply management system. They got rid of it. And they're doing fine. And I don't know, I don't understand the fixation with unpasteurized, but I have a total fixation with free choice. So if somebody wants to go out and drink unpasteurized milk, go for it. And if somebody wants to sell it to you, go for it. As far as I'm concerned, I should be able to go in Pritis there where I live and buy my own dairy cow and put a little sign up on the side of the road and sell it. Hey, you can come by and suck it straight from the teat of my cow for $5 a shot or whatever I want to make it. That's free enterprise. I don't think I'd get a lot of customers. I doubt I'd get rich. I couldn't see myself setting a trend. But whose place is it to say that I can't do it? Well, right now it's the government's. I would be arrested pretty quickly for that. And I'd be kind of worried about the people who would actually take part in my offer. But all the same, we need to open the markets up. And that supply management is a large one where we could do that if we could just get to it. So let's see what else we got in the... Oh, yes. Here's another one of the myths going on since I've ranted on that one enough. But going back to the truckers' convoy and the federal crisis, in quotes marks, I think Dave covered this. There's a story in the Western Standard about that too. And that's the grants. Remember the Ottawa businesses who were suffering hardships because while the protest was there, they were getting pushed out of business and they weren't going to be able to make it. And oh dear. Well, whenever people actually asked businesses, most of them said, no, it's not that big a deal. And also, of course, most of the businesses lost far more money due to pandemic restrictions than they ever would out of some protests in the area. But they said, we're going to help these businesses. We're going to have a program. Of course, there's always a program where you can apply and we'll bail you out. We'll give you some money for this crisis. We'll give you some grants. Well, those grants are 40% lower than expected, apparently, because again, there weren't that many businesses who needed it. Some are still putting their hand out because they want money and they need it. But I mean, so much for that crisis. If it was that huge, you'd think that they would probably be overwhelmed by people asking for it. But businesses have pride; they're capitalists, and most of them, we're just going to carry on, leave me alone. So much for the businesses. There's 1,900 of them who theoretically could have qualified for this, and only 1,200 applied even. So I guess perhaps the convoy wasn't quite as damaging as we were told it would be. There's a shocker. Eh? Well, welcome to the mainstream media. By the way, I was watching our mainstream media. It does get my ranting up quite a bit. I threw that out on a tweet. CTV, I don't know. I torture myself, but still I need some noise while I eat. I'm one of those people, if I hear somebody chewing, I want to strangle them. So whenever we dine, I make sure I've got some noise. And CTV News provides noise, if nothing else. And I do like to see at least what's breaking on the news while it's going. And of course, one of their headline items was Uber and Lyft are getting rid of the masking requirements, which is great. I mean, I've said it before. I like occasionally driving Uber. I'm licensed for it. I go out on Friday nights, make a few extra bucks, but most importantly of all, I get to meet a whole bunch of people outside of politics, and I get a diverse point of view. It really helps me think. It's a great night. I look forward to it. And now not having to wear a mask while I do is great. But what does CTV do? Predictable as all get out. As soon as they tell that story, they go straight to this biologist, some guy I've never heard of. They probably had to search far and wide to find or say, this is a very dangerous development. This is very premature. This is going to put people at risk. Can they not once just pick somebody out and say, hey, that's good. I like it. It's about time we lightened up. No, it's all doom and gloom. It doesn't matter where they go. They've got to find the negative spin to put on it. They do not want to celebrate anything open up. They just want to spread fear. I keep calling it what it is. It's panic porn, because I think there's some people that actually get off on being scared. The same ones who go to horror movies. Now the scariest thing you can watch is the bloody news. And the news is more than happy to indulge them. And they did it again last night. They got my vein pulsing again. Like, geez, guys, just celebrate something or try a little bit of balance, but you can write their script for them. Positive development, find an expert to say why it's negative. Sick to death of it. I can't wait for the legacy media to go down. So I got to thank you guys for keeping us competing with them. I'm going to speak to one of our sponsors really quickly one more time, I guess. So while I'm at it, because that's the other thing that keeps going, that's Bitcoin Well. I should mention them a second time in a broadcast because, hey, that's what they're paying for. And they do provide a fantastic service. Again, digital currencies, they're huge. That's what everybody's talking about. We were talking about Polyev. He paid a bill in a restaurant as a campaign sort of gimmick with Bitcoin. And he's pointing out how digital currencies could be what will help us, fix our economy or distance ourselves from it, or at least stop this spiral with fiat currencies. But I mean, again, it's a complicated new world. It sounds strange, a currency that's not government issued. Well, these guys help lead you into that if that's what you want to do. They're a safe Western Canadian-based company. They offer one-on-one, hands-on service, all sorts of. They'll set up your wallet. I mean, they helped me. I'm a Luddite in a lot of ways. It's funny. I was a kid who had to teach my parents how to program a VCR. Now I'm at a point where I would have had to call one of my kids to set up my Bitcoin wallet. But instead, actually, Bitcoin Well, they helped me out, Zoom meeting in that case. But you can also have face-to-face meetings with them, get you into it safely. You always have control of your money at every phase of it. This is the way to go, guys. Check them out. BitcoinWell.com. See what they have to offer and see if Bitcoin's for you. It might not be, but this is where you can get a good, trustworthy source to tell you what they offer, what it's about. So let's see. And finally, I'm just going to wrap things up, I think. And we will talk about what I got tomorrow. I've got Colin Craig of 2nd Street Org coming on. He's been on before. He's really good. Those guys do some good stuff. And what I like about them is they get a bunch of first-person stories. They get stories from people. Unlike CTV, who's always going to find somebody negative. Well, this is some negative stuff, perhaps, but they really want to get a mix. So they have a bunch of stories they're sharing from people who lived through socialism. Yeah, we'll get real, unvarnished stories from people. They're not exactly ones who are thrilled about what they had to endure. Because a lot of people, young people, I don't think they understand what really is entailed with socialism. And Colin and I are going to have a conversation about that tomorrow. As well, we're going to bring Dave Naylor on. He's a Western Standard columnist. He's always a lively, fun character to have on here. We're going to talk about some of his columns, not the least of which was one just on that thin blue line thing. It's still going on in police forces across the country. Right now, it's inflamed in Calgary, but it happens all over. And it all ties into that whole defund the police movement and a lot of that ugliness. So we'll have a good conversation then, plus I'll rant on something new, and I'll interact with you guys. So thank you all for tuning in today, guys. I will see you tomorrow at 11:30. Oh, and Danielle Smith will be on at 9 a.m. again tomorrow morning. So you got lots of content. Be sure to tune in. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow.